Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to the 11th episode of the KYO series, or the Know Your Options Post 12th Grade series by Planty. In this session, we will be covering a Bachelor of Business Administration in Financial Investment Analysis, or a BBA FIA degree. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Bhavya Bhatia, a graduate of the 2019 batch from Shaheed Sukhdev College of Business Studies, or SSCBS, which is affiliated to Delhi University. He has been a financial intern at Ernst& Young and is currently working as an analyst at Deloitte India. In today's session, Bhavya will be speaking in detail on pursuing a BBA FIA, what it entails, and the various opportunities and career options that it opens up upon completion. I would now like to hand it over to Bhavya to begin.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Abhishek. I'm glad to be a part of this event. And I want to thank Plan for doing this, going ahead with this series and going ahead with this great initiative. Because I personally, seen the kind of information asymmetry that's there during these sort of admissions and how difficult a process this is. And so just, being able to provide this access to people who might not otherwise be able to get it and might not be able to connect with such people, I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's extremely helpful. And so kudos to you guys, and I'm sure it's going to go well, the whole series. So the way that I'm thinking of doing this session is that I'll try and go chronologically and try to take everyone through the sort of journey I've had. What are the sort of motivations I had at different decision points, so to say, in school, while trying to apply to different colleges, and even during my time at college, and the sort of career I wanted to have later on. And while I talk about these different things chronologically, I'll try and go into different tangents and talk about different aspects that might be relevant to people who are thinking about CBS or thinking about doing this sort of degree, and talk about different experiences, talk about different other people and the things I've learned from them. And feel free to ask any questions in the middle if I'm not being able to sufficiently address anything. And I'll do my best to just give insights to people so that they get a good glimpse of what life at CBS was and how they can get in and how they should prepare for it. So I'll start off with my motivations around 9th, 10th grade. So essentially, I was in DPS Sushant Lok. It's a school in Gurgaon. I've been staying here in Gurgaon for the past 10, 12 years. And so in about 8th, 9th grade, I think I was fairly clear that I do not like science. I'm not a science kid. I'm not going to be doing engineering at any point of time in my life. And I loved math. I was someone who was really into public speaking. I'd done a lot of elocution competitions and debates, etc. And so I was socially aware. I was interested in different topics. I used to watch the news and look at Arnab Goswami and him shouting at different people at 9 o'clock. And at that time, it seemed interesting because he was getting an entire forum to just speak nonstop, and nobody was stopping him. So those were sort of things I was interested in. And at that time, I had no idea about what economics is, what finance is, or anything of that sort. And so given my interest in public speaking and being social topics, etc., at that time I became familiar with MUNs. For those who do not know what MUNs are, so MUNs are like model United Nations simulations that are typically there in high school and also somewhat in college, where they simulate different wings or committees of the United Nations. And essentially it's a competitive sort of format where you go in as representing a country, and you're allowed different forums to speak on different topics. And so what happened was I got into this because I was interested in public speaking, and I was nowhere into economics or anything of that sort, but I happened to go for this Model UN where I was thrown into this economic committee, and it was, I think, related to the 2008 financial crisis. And I was a 9th grader. I mean, I had no idea what is this, what is the Eurozone, and how exactly monetary and fiscal policies are framed, or how is it exactly impacting banks, etc. And I went there just being someone who wanted to shout and scream and talk like I'd seen people on TV do. And I just went there and just saw how it would be, knowing that this is not my area of interest. And I spent 3 days just looking at people, listening to how they talked and how they spoke. And I was like, this is not my piece of cake. I am really bad at this. I'm bad at economics. And I went out of it. I had a great learning experience, but I knew that, I mean, I'm not good at this. I'm, not someone who can possibly do economics or anything of that sort. But I don't know, I was someone who was extremely competitive and felt like I was challenged by that sort of situation somehow. And I felt like, maybe this is some sort of challenge that I should pick up and see if, what if I read about it? What if I learn about it? Can I become good at it in some period of time? And so after that, my MUN was done. I went out. I went to Amazon, Flipkart, searched left and center, and bought all the sort of economic books that anyone could. It wasn't a subject at school and or anything of that sort, so I didn't have any formal sort of system. And so I bought this, mini IMA book, handbook on economics. I bought this international economics book, and I spent all my time after school just reading about all of this sort of stuff. And I read about all the basics. I started reading the newspaper daily. I started reading these large voluminous books about economics, and somehow I felt, okay, now this is starting to make sense. This is the sort of system in which I am a cog. This is the sort of system in which I am existing, and this is how demand and supply is. This is how different institutions in this economic system work, and this is what they were speaking about when I'd gone for that conference as well. And so I learned all of that, and I felt that this was extremely interesting and. Maybe something that I had just not have gotten a chance to understand, learn about. And maybe now that I've read about it, maybe if I start applying it, it might be even more interesting to me, and it might be something that I can learn more of. And so I spent my time over the next couple of years just doing different model UNs and doing different economic committees. So uh, there were different sort of simulations like the International Monetary Fund. There was World Bank. There was Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, and all of these were related to different sort of economic problems. So, for instance, the IMF, you were looking at in the World Bank, you were looking at giving different sort of loans to low income countries. In the IMF, you were looking at revising the structure so that the voting structure and thinking about different crises that the IMF is facing and things of that nature. And all of that seemed very fascinating to me. And uh, I got into that sort of thing and I started learning how it worked. And so at that point, as I mentioned, I was interested. I was good at math. I was good at mathematics. I was good at looking at things quantitatively. And so what I learned while doing these sort of model UNs and all these simulations was that not many people are looking at the problems, even so social problems and the complex social problems, and representing it quantitatively. And so I wasn't really doing too well. I was winning like what fifth, sixth position initially when I started off. But once I learned that there is a quantitative way of possibly presenting things and talking about things, I would try and try to reduce a complex problem and present it through charts, present it through different graphs, and present it through different mathematical relationships that I could formulate basis the things I had read, and that became an enriching insight that I could provide. And so I slowly started to do extremely well at Model UNs. There were different schools coming from across Delhi NCR, like Modern Barakhamba, DPS, Masura Road, and all these schools that had been doing Model UNs for a long period of time. They were extremely good at it. And I used to be neck to neck with them. Some from coming from a school where there had been no formal training, there had been no sort of teaching about how to do this stuff, and somehow started doing really well at this because I started to look at those things quantitatively, started to look at how social problems and economic problems can possibly be looked at from that lens. And so this was like my journey in 10th, and so. And I realized after doing Model U and being exposed to this sort of extracurricular activity that, okay, I've eliminated science as I had to choose my stream in 11th and 12th. And so I decided that, I'm fairly clear that I'm not interested in science at all. I'm interested in social topics and I'm interested in, things like humanities. but I don't find that challenge and this ability to be able to reduce different complicated social topics into a quantitative form in humanities subjects like history and political science. And I felt that those are interesting to me also, but I might not be able to see myself doing that if this aspect of it is something I cannot do the next couple of years and possibly the next 5 years. And so I went ahead with commerce and started, and I took commerce as a stream in 11th and 12th. And I was doing, I started studying it in 11th. And all of these sort of things at that time. But when I started studying my stream, I fell in love with accounting. And it was, I think I had one of the best teachers in school as well. And I was fortunate enough to learn it as a subject that most people do not love. And I loved the aspect of being able to then see big large corporations and understand what their performance is and how they function through 2 3 pieces of paper, which is typically your balance sheet, P&L, and cash flow statement. And that seemed like a very fascinating aspect to me, the whole reduction of you know different sets of actions that these multiple individuals are taking being reduced into certain figures that you can quickly analyze, and you can learn to analyze through this art and science that is accounting. And so I knew that this is something I love. I knew that economics is something I love, and I was good at math. And that's why I felt that commerce is something that I want to do and I like doing when I was studying it in 11th and 12th. And so through that journey, I did really well in school because of my contributions to Model UN, etc. I ended up being the head boy of my school. I organized the first Model UN conference where we got numerous schools, and it was an extremely successful conference. And I did all those things on an extracurricular level, because of which I was engaged on a practical aspect with what I was studying in commerce. And that was something that I loved doing as well. That I was studying commerce, I was studying the different aspects of these sort of things, of how businesses work and how the economy works. And I was also applying that practically to Model UNs and different committees where I could talk about those core principles of accounting and economics, and present them again in different committees, while talking about banking, while talking about different banking institutions, financial institutions, and the problems that they were facing. And I thought that that is also an aspect that I really like, that being able to use the theory that I like into a practical format, and being able to see where its implications really are in the say, so to say, the real world. And so those were the 2 3 sort of things that were being cultivated while I was doing my high schooling in 11th and 12th. And so once I had done this and built this sort of base and built these sort of foundations about what I like and what are the sort of things I want to do over the next 3 4 years, in 12th I was fairly sure that I didn't want to go abroad. I didn't want to do my wanted to stay close to home. I wanted to stay in Delhi. And I was fairly sure that I wanted to do commerce first. Further, I was sure that this is what I want to study, this is what I want to learn more of, and these are things that excite me, and that's what I want the next opportunity in my life after school to provide, or the institution to provide. And so I felt the need to look at options. And of course, any commerce aspirant typically looks at, if he wants to stay in Delhi and has these sort of motivations, usually the first thing that comes to their head is SRCC. Let's go to SRCC. And so yeah, I did that. I built this whole foundation around going to SRCC and being interested in aiming for that school, because it was touted to be one of the best schools in the country. And I went for like a model UN to SRCC and try to see what the institution is like, to immerse myself in the experience so that I can aim for that really well, and those sort of the secret sort of things. And I worked really hard throughout 12th, and studied extremely hard, and was extremely immersed in the subjects that I was studying. And I loved studying what I was studying as well. And I gave it my best shot. But after giving the boards, after some time, once the results came, it didn't go as well as I'd expected. And at that time itself, I think midway through 12th, I had no idea about CBS. Nobody talks about CBS in school. There's school teachers, etc., don't have any idea what CBS is, because it's not really a commerce. They don't provide a commerce degree or an economics degree, and those are the sort of two fields you typically go from commerce. And so I think midway through my 12th, because I had someone who was studying at CBS. CBS is College Business Studies. Shaheed Sukhdev College Business Studies, by the way. Who was studying at CBS and was my senior and was in my society, lives in my colony. I just heard of the name. I had heard that this guy is smart and he went to CBS. So I just heard that what this thing exists, but I had no intent on going there at all. And so after my boards were done and everything, I had simultaneously, and board results had come, I simultaneously started taking some of these coachings and started preparing for these entrances to CBS, because I just heard of that name. I was like, there's some chance that my board results might not go well, so might as well prepare for this. We'll see how it, how life paves after that. And so after a lot of preparation this for these entrances and doing different things. So I'll talk about the different entrances and how to prepare for them. Possibly in the end, I'll save that and talk about detail about them in the end. But so after a lot of preparation for these sort of entrances, and for the DU-JAT entrance, which is the one that you have to give to get into CBS or a bunch of other 5-6 colleges, I finally was able to get a good rank and get into CBS. And so at that time, I mean, being someone who was aiming for a college like SSCBS, I wanted to know what is the sort of course that I'll be getting here, because typically you'll get a BCom or BCom honors or an economic honors degree when you're going into SSCBS or other colleges in the U as well. And the courses that are being offered at CBS were different. They were Bachelor of Management Studies and BBA in Financial Investment Analysis. So BBA is Bachelor's in Business Administration, which is like Bachelor's of the MBA thing, basically, essentially. So I knew at that point that I have to understand what these courses are about, and is it going to be something that fits into the priorities I talked about earlier. And to my I was surprised to know that actually after I went through the syllabus, after I talked to people, the sort of priorities I had, the sort of things that I was looking for, were way more relevant in the degrees that I looked at, like BMS and BBA FIA, because one, they aren't restricted to just one sort of course. So BCom honors typically has a focus more on accounting, and an eco honors is focused only in economics, right? And I love both. I loved business as well. I wanted to understand more of business. I loved accounting and eco, and I loved math as well. And so I wanted all of these aspects to be there in the next degree that I go ahead and get. And I felt that the sort of thing that I was looking for was more relevant in these two courses, because they introduce you to all of these disciplines and give you broad-based exposure across all of these disciplines. And simultaneously, there is a practical aspect to it, because there are different courses that cover, say, if you're studying something like econometrics, is also a computer science course related to econometrics. And across different semesters, you will slowly build up your base in knowing about accounting, statistics, economics, etc. And then you start application towards, finance, etc. as well. And I felt that it was way more holistic and practical, and it was quantitative and those sort of things as well. And that's why I felt that these are courses that would be ideal for me. And I felt BBA Finance and Investment Analysis was better than BMS at that time for me, because I felt that I had a slightly more quantitative bent, and the thing that I was looking for was slightly more quantitative. And so subjects like human resources and law, etc., which were not as quantitative but were there in BMS, for instance, were things that I did not particularly want to study as much as other quantitative subjects like econometrics and macroeconomics, etc., that were instead there in BBFI and not there particularly in BMS. And so I went with that, and I was fortunate enough to go get into CBS, and I so that was sort of the sort of process that I had and the priorities I had while getting into CBS. And I'll delve into different details about how to get into CBS and what are things I did and preparation later on. So what happened once I got into CBS, and before I talk to you about what happened once I got into CBS, I'll just give you a glimpse of what it was like when initially when I was going to get just my admission. So initially, the campus was situated in Jhilmil, and Jhilmil is in East Delhi, and it's it's not a very it's not a well heard of area, so to say. And I never heard of Jilman. I've been in Delhi going on for a large period of time, and I went there, and I mean, it's an extremely small space. It was a school earlier, like the campus, and it used to be a school such that it was actually a school that was, then converted into two colleges. It was that small, and there was no like auditorium. There's not much space. There was barely a playground, like whatever field, so to say, and it seemed like a very dilapidated space, so to say. But when I went there and I talked to people, I looked at the sort of individuals that were there, and I talked to the teachers, I talked to the people who were getting admissions at that point of time. I was like, I want to go here. This is going to be home for me. This is going to be an ideal space for me, because I felt that the sort of community that I'm going to get and the sort of learnings I'm going to get from these sort of people are going to be something I'm going to cherish. And that's the sort of uh, thing that I had in mind when I was joining. I did not care for the sort of infrastructure or facilities or anything of that sort. I was extremely I was I was sold by the sort of people that are there, and the different sort of aspects of the community and courses, etc. And so I went, and the first month itself, once you join CBS, you realize how the when you talk about competition, and you think that you've been in a competitive space because you've done model events in school and you've been the head boy and you've done different things. First month into CBS, you realize, okay, these people are of to another level, right? Everybody is extremely hyper competitive and at the top of their fields and doing different things. And mind you, just a brief on how the process is. I'll get into the details later. As I said, the process of getting in is that you have to get an aptitude test. So naturally, the people who get in are have a high aptitude, and you also have to have a GDPI. So they are well spoken as well. The people who get in, and so everyone was had different strengths and was able to present them well and be able to articulate them well as well. And so naturally, I mean, it becomes an extremely competitive ground where whatever forte you have, you're able to do well in it, because you can think well and you can express it well as well. So the first month itself, I have some talking points just so I don't sort of, if you catch me looking down, those sort of things that I don't forget I'm looking at. So the first month itself, I realized that people had already started going for these different competitions and started building their CV, and they were already that ambitious to be able to know what exactly is going to fit in where into their career ambitions. That's how like driven those people are. And the more you got to know them, the more you realize that these are the sort of people who, well, I would say I'm also like that, extremely ambitious, extremely driven, and people who knew that they the amount of hard work that they put in life might not have caught up to the sort of things that they wanted. For instance, most of them might have wanted to go into SRCC, into top colleges, so to say, the top colleges in DU, etc. But they didn't get their cake, and so now they're here to claim their share, and they're here to work even harder to get the next best. And so everyone was extremely ambitious and driven. They wanted to prove themselves, and that's why day one itself, everybody was doing different things. And as soon as you get in, you get to know about different placements. You get to know about what companies are coming in. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because of this B school nature and everything. I'm not familiar with other colleges where this sort of atmosphere is there, because most people get to know about these things maybe in the third year of college, or when they're starting to think about their career, end of the second year. But right when you get into CBS, you get to know about all this and what are sort of companies that are coming in, what are sort of different things that people are doing right from day one to get into those companies. And so it was extremely competitive. But having said that, there was the amount of opportunities that were there and the sort of different things that people could do were in abundance. And so after being a nerd and studying after for a couple of years, I was sure that I wanted to do and be part of clubs and societies, because I was interested in public speaking. I was interested in talking about different social issues and presenting my point of view. And so I was very sure that I wanted to be part of the debating society, and I also wanted to do something different that I had never done before. And so I was interested in doing something either in the entrepreneurial space or in the social sector. And so I found the perfect match for that as well. I found Enactus, which was essentially a social entrepreneurship cell, and I'll talk more about that as well. And so I picked those two clubs and societies that I wanted to seriously pursue alongside my degree in my first year. And uh, I mean, even these societies and getting into them, and the whole process of getting the whole process that these societies conduct is also extremely competitive, and that will speak volumes about CBS. They have like marketing campaigns that they plan out in the first couple of weeks. They do digital marketing and plan out different events every second day. They have market stock market competitions. They have GDPIs. They have different tests, everything just to get into societies. And that's why you realize that how supposedly elite they make them also seem, but also how seriously they take it, and how serious it is to them, and how professional the atmosphere is within those societies as well, within those clubs. And so that also seemed like a very interesting process right in the first month of getting into societies. And also there was like an actual limit posed by the college on the number of societies you could keep. Like you couldn't actually keep more than two societies in your first year and more than one in your second year. And that seemed very, that's not something that typically any college or any other administration could typically, or even if it's not from the administration, if it's just a convention, shouldn't usually be there, because you're in college, you have relatively more time, you can do as many as you want, right? But that's how seriously they took it. They won't take you and let you be a part of the society in your second year if you're not full-fledgedly committed towards only it. And I also wanted to think of some other society in your second year, or you can't be a part of three societies if you're thinking of it also in your first year. And so that's how seriously they take it, and how that's what I was talking about in terms of hyper competitive nature, and also how ambitious and driven those people are. And so I found my fit. I was fortunate enough to get into a debating society and in Actis, and I had beautiful experiences that I'll speak about through those two. And I mean, I knew that I was someone that was, I mean, the aspect of the debating society that I loved and that attracted me was that I could, you had to, im- through an impromptu sort of manner, in about 15-20 minutes, develop concise and clear, strong argumentation for a particular topic that you had never heard of before. And it could be in any sort of stream, any sort of study, right? Or anything of that sort, that's current, that's of historic nature, anything of that sort. And that's what enticed me, that this is where real thinking comes in, quick thinking comes in. And it was also collaborative. You had to work in teams, you had to do it while being able to communicate what you were thinking of to other people who are a part of your team. And typically it would be like a 3v3 competition format, and it was spread across 2-3 days. It was extremely competitive. You would have tournaments over every weekend in throughout the year, and different colleges across DU, law schools, uh, engineering colleges, etc., would come in and send different number of teams, and you would slowly compete to then reach the knockout stages of the quarterfinals, finals, etc. And that competitive aspect enticed me. The public speaking aspect enticed me, and there was also fraternity that I really liked, which I love, was looking forward to and being part of, because you don't typically get to experience these sort of clubs and societies in school. I mean, usually you don't, and I didn't. And so the sort of fraternity that is there, which is like you're almost like you're running your own organization, and you're a bunch of 30-40 people who are running your own organization, deciding on policies and rules and how internal functioning is going to be, of how you're going to compete against different societies outside in the debating circuit, so to say. And it felt like a self-sufficient unit that you're running as well. So I love that aspect of being a part of the community and also running it, and being someone who could represent that particular unit and compete. Right. So I loved debating because of that aspect, and so that was why I was a part of debating, and I full-fledgedly did it in my first year. And Enactus was a completely different experience. So Enactus was a social entrepreneurship cell, and essentially what its beliefs and the idea of it was that they would build self-sustainable businesses, and typically in for the underprivileged, right? So the idea was that we are students. We are not going to be people who are going to drive any profit. We're not going to be driving any sort of take for us, but we're going to build a model wherein we get in different stakeholders, and we're going to get an entrepreneur. And through the interactions between these different stakeholders, over the long run, we want that the entrepreneur becomes so empowered that he or she is able to run that business by themselves and be able to generate a profit and be able to own it, run it, everything. And that was the aspect that we were doing. So essentially, it was about being able to create impact, being able to run a business, being able to and by running a business, I mean also setting up a business, being able to think of where you want to put the business and look at every aspect of the value chain while doing it, right? And that seemed like something that would be extremely practical and extremely impact driven for me when I was getting into this. And it seemed like something that I looked at doing in school as well. That I'm not just studying my BBA degree, I'm trying to also apply it. I'm looking at, if I'm studying cost and management accounting, if I'm studying economics, I'm applying it towards understanding what is the demand and supply in a particular space. If I'm setting up a unit, what is the costing when I'm setting up a lab or a business sort of an entity in a particular space. And those sort of things, as I said, I'd liked earlier in school, those are the things that I was able to do now as well, and which is why it seemed like extremely exciting to me as well. And so the project that I was a part of was called Udan. I think it's still there. And essentially what we would do is we go to remote villages in Haryana and UP, and we would set up computer labs. And we the computer labs would be set up through grants, etc., that we would get from different foundations. And the computers were put up through refurbished computers that we would get from different entities. And hence, so we don't have any capital expenditure. We set up these labs, and we get a woman entrepreneur from this particular village who would be running the lab and also teaching the students and kids about digital education and doing these different ICT courses, basic computer science, Excel, PowerPoint, Word, and also how to use your computer, use your Microsoft. So essentially, looking at the sort of courses you would typically learn in third, fourth, fifth grade in most of the Delhi schools, right, in computer science. And those are sort of courses that we were trying to build. And the idea was towards bridging the gap and aiming to and being a part of the Digital India mission at that time, because that was something that was coming up right at the point when I joined college. And so that was the idea. And once the entrepreneur had been able to get enough people and be able to sort of develop a profit by running the entity, by running the lab, we who were initially helping and supporting different functions of running the lab, we would devolve our involvement. We would completely divest ourselves uh, effort wise, right? And that was the idea, that we build something and then the woman entrepreneur has a self-sustainable business that she earlier did. And so it was an incredible experience, just going to different villages, understanding how people think, how you know how dilapidated the different structures of formal education are there, and how access is such a problem for the basic things, and how in different government schools, even though there are grants provided for setting up computer labs, it takes ages for even a single computer to be set up. And all of those aspects, going on ground and actually seeing rural India, actually seeing how those people think, was just incredible. And I had to do different functions. I just didn't have to like go ahead and help with the running of the lab. We had to think of things like expansion strategy. So while thinking of expansion strategy, you can't just go ahead and set a lab wherever you want. You have to look at the census data. You have to look at different filters that you have to apply, and how you could look at and find the right customer given the income segment, given the different educational qualifications, given the sort of access that is already there for digital education. And you have to look at it through secondary research, through primary research, go and talk to stakeholders, go and talk to gram panchayats, go and talk to, district magistrate over there, and try and get more information, and then through stages set up a lab. And you had to also be involved in exiting different labs, and that was also an emotional process, right? Like, we had seniors who had been involved in the labs for ages, and you had to think of whether this is a unit that's worth running, and if it's going to be something that we as people should continue to put efforts in. And we had to think of those sort of decisions. And we also had to think of new models for the future, financial models for the future that could help run the labs. For instance, we worked on a microfinance model where we would get, self-help groups that were, typically finance. Self-help groups are essentially, usually mahila mandals are there in villages, which provide different sorts of, which pool funds and provide financing to a member of that unit, of that group, for different operations that they want to do, for setting up a, say, a tailor shop, or for sometimes for personal things, for personal loans. And it differs, the mahila mandals ambit differs from village to village, but that was a sort of basic thing that they did. And so we were trying to see if we can tap them for putting up the initial funding for a lab, and that would involve them being sort of an equity stakeholder in a lab itself, and being involved in that process. And that would mean more people feeling like the lab was their own, of some sort. And so we had to build models around that. What is the cut that they will have, how is their involvement going to be, and things of that nature. And those were extremely exciting things. And finally, after we'd spent a year, there was a national competition that we had gone for, and you had to compete with different colleges, IIT Delhi, SRCC, different other IITs, different colleges from DU, 90, 100 colleges. And you had to present your project and why you think you have been able to create substantial impact, and how you've done it, and why you potentially are one that have stood out against the other Enactus teams in different colleges across the country. And so there was a lot of preparation for it. You had to prepare decks and presentations, etc., in the last few months of your first year. And so that was an incredible experience. We ended up being the winners of the national championship amongst all of these 90 plus colleges because of the impact that we'd driven. And so Udan was one of our projects, but we also had done other projects as well. And so that was an incredible experience, being at the topmost college, and being the topmost college in the country who has driven this sort of impact. And so, that's where I felt that, CBS is really something. These are sort of people who are extremely driven, and who were able to do so well amongst these colleges. And that became even more clear when they won. After you win the national championship, you qualify for the World Cup round. And in that year, CBS has Delhi University has different colleges, and all these colleges work independently as self-sufficient units, and they don't really get funding from as much funding from Delhi University or from other organizations. But if you're competing at the world level, CBS is competing with, say, a Monash University, which is the equivalent of a Delhi University, or you're competing with a full-fledged university. Right. And so that was a scale at which we were competing with different universities, and they have so much capital and so much, there's so much support from those institutions to be able to drive impact. It was extremely competitive and difficult to, be able to think of even outwitting them or doing something that was trying to create change that was far beyond the kind of change that they had the ability to provide. Right. And despite all of this, it just showed at that point at the World Cup, our team ended up second across the globe, and it just showed me how CBS, which has barely any resources, we used to function in that small space in Jilmel, in the smallest of schools. I mean, it was a school converted into a college, and we had this small room that we used to sit in and have discussions and think about business plans. And from that small room, we were able to be, amongst 30 plus, 40 plus countries, we were second in the world at that point. And that's when I realized that CBS really is something, because they're able to do limited resources, drive impact, and create and be so much better and do so much more than what people can think of. And that's when I was extremely, extremely, proud of the sort of college I was, and I realized what the sort of impact that my peers and people around me could create. And so after I had this experience, I full-fledgedly got into debating in my second year, because I felt that I had reached the crescendo of my journey in an actress, and I felt other people could do better than me. And in I just joined debate, and I felt that I could do more in debating in my second year. And at that point, of course, I was doing my academics side by side. I was a good student. I had a good GPA. I was trying to keep everything in a balanced way. And in my second year, I started to think. I've been exposed to so many different things. I looked at development. I looked at being in. I've studied my subjects, etc., and started to then explore different things that I could possibly do. And simultaneously, I was doing debating, and I was fortunate enough to then become also in my second year the vice president of my debating society. So I had some leadership responsibilities as well. So what happened is that in my second year, I started studying more, understanding my subjects better, and I did some internships. I did the debating, running of the organization of my debating society more seriously, and I learned a lot from these different aspects. So first was that I realized that I am someone who eventually needs to run a business. I am someone who cannot potentially be. I need to be self-sustainable and be the only one that I'm answerable to. And I learned that after being the vice president of my debating society, because I was extremely attached to the cause. I was the leader of that particular organization, and I felt that I do my best when I'm emotionally attached to a cause, which was of doing well for the society and becoming the best debating society possibly in the circuit, and being someone who has a responsibility to do well and be right at the helm of being able to drive and dedicate 24 hours towards it. So I realized that I maybe not be the person who is at the third, fourth, fifth, sixth level, who is a part of a corporate and doing and not have the emotional attachment or that motivation towards that particular organization. When you typically at that level, you don't. And I realized while doing debate, while being a vice president, that I need to be in a space after 5 10 years when I'm running my own business and be at the top, so that I can make my own independent decisions and not and be emotionally attached to the organization and cause that I'm working for. And that was one aspect that I learned through my uh, journey in debating and being a leader in that particular organization. And it, also while studying and learning about different subjects, I started loving finance. And I mean, the initial first year is extremely foundational, so you don't really get to know what finance is. And my degree was BBA in financial investment analysis. But only in my say second year, I understood what finance really is, because you start to apply those foundations into really understanding businesses. And so I learned different subjects. I learned valuation, I learned corporate finance, and I learned other subjects like econometrics. And all of these subjects seem extremely enticing to me because they were quantitative, they were related to accounts and understanding and reading different financial statements and trying to derive insights about businesses. And through my second year, I learned that I'm interested in finance. That's what I want to do or be good at in the next stage of my career. I learned that I eventually want to be like a, I won't say like an entrepreneur, so to say, but someone who's running their own business. That could be that I eventually climb the ladder as well. I mean, I learned that, and I also learned that I'm because of the process of debating and the way that the activity is. I learned that problem solving or looking at how to think in a structured way and and critical thinking and being able to reduce very complex problems into simple forms through a structure that you follow is something that I really like. And so these were the two, three things that were in my head when I was in my second year. And I realized that after talking to people and after exploring different options, that consulting might be a good fit for me. And that's something that I can do potentially. And so that's why after second year was over, I'd done one internship as well. I started preparing for consulting placements and jobs in my third year. And I was fortunate enough to get a job in consulting in Deloitte itself, and it was a client facing role. It was right into uh, the consulting space. Like you would actually be doing the things that you heard of, that I heard of and talked to people about right out of graduation, and you'd get lot of opportunities. And I mean, I was interested in finance, so I knew that I would also be able to apply my financial knowledge in different problems that I had to solve for businesses while being a part of consulting. And I'll talk about consulting in specific when I reach that stage of my journey slightly later. So that's how I started preparing in my third year. And by the time I had gotten my job at Deloitte in consulting, I'd also given my GMAT, and I thought that I had to secure my future later on. I wanted to do my MBA in India. I wanted to do my MBA quickly as well. I didn't want to wait too many years, and I'd applied to I applied to ISB, and ISB was one of the premier colleges. It's, I think, the number one college ranked according to Financial Times in India, MBA college. And I was fortunate enough to get a deferred admission to ISB in my final year itself, and so I could work for 2-3 years and go to ISB after that. So I would have direct practical exposure of consulting and working in this space, and then also be able to do my MBA after that and think of what are the gaps I can plug in my MBA, and what are the different things I can now specialize in, what are things that I need to learn more of. And that was something I thought seems like a good plan. I've studied enough and done my BBA right now, so I have some theoretical knowledge. I need to apply some of it over the next 2-3 years to think what are the gaps really, right? And so hence I felt that ISB would be a good fit for me, and that's why I applied for it. And I was fortunate enough to get into it through some processes that, if the audience wants, I can get into as well. And so everything seemed well. I developed different things and different foundations for why I want to get into consulting, etc. And I'd gotten the sort of job that I wanted, and the MBA school that I wanted as well. And so it seemed all great, and I felt that I in the right headspace. And so college seemed like a great journey. But at this point in time, I'd like to just talk about what other things, other people, how you know, what are the different things that other people were potentially doing, right? And what are the different paths that they took, because that might be potentially useful. After which I'll talk about my Deloitte experience, etc. So, I mean, I had my own priorities and things that I thought of, but CBS was doing extremely well. So uh, for instance, after I'd done, after my vice president and debating experience, we ended up being labeled, and we ended up winning numerous tournaments and being extremely successful in debating in my year. And we were labeled by different magazines as the best debating society in Delhi University. And so several people who were part of the debating society itself wanted to go into things like international relations. Some of them wanted to go into law, and some went into law. Have gotten admissions into law fac, for instance. This is one of the best, one of the top few colleges in the country. If you've done your, if you want to go into law after doing your graduation, and other people went into international relations. Many went into consulting. And other than that, there were other people who were from my class itself, from my classroom, who wanted to do their MBA immediately after college. And so I think they took 1 year of 1.5 year preparation for the CAT, and I think 7-8 people get into IM ABC, which are the top three called IMs in the country, and one of the premier institutes for MBA. And they got into these IMs right after college, right after completing their graduation. And I mean, I'm saying this because getting into these IMs is an extremely, extremely difficult process. And every year, a numerous bunch of people right after college would get in. And if you go to an IM, any of these IMs, you'll see a bunch of CBS people who've gotten admits there and who are doing extremely well there. And by extremely well, I mean they're also competing neck to neck with those IITians and the people who typically do really well and get good placements, are doing well academically in college, etc. In the B schools as well. And so those were the sort of other paths that people were taking. Then other people would be thinking of working in development consulting. For instance, people who had worked in Enactus had explored the development space. They wanted to go directly into that space and work again to drive impact. So there are different organizations like Samagra, Satwa, Dalberg, which are extremely well reputed organizations, and they got jobs there because of the sort of impact they created through Enactus. And they were in the development consulting space. They were solving problems for development, and they were essentially solving complex social problems, but helping working as a consultant to provide advice to different organizations or different units that would be involved in the social problems on the ground level or at the macro level, maybe the government, etc. And there are the other people who had full-fledgedly only wanted to do finance throughout the course of their degree. And so they ended up completing degrees like FRM, degrees like the CA, degrees like CFA, and even some of them did their actuary papers, and they studied it hardcore throughout, and now are in top banks, are in uh, you know in premier financial institutions, and in funds, right, in venture capital funds, in private equity funds. And all of these are extremely lucrative options for anyone who wants to go and be specializing in finance. And you know they were able to do it alongside their degree and be able to make the most of the degree and the things that our degree provides, and also simultaneously do these very difficult qualifications like the CA, etc. as well. And so those were the other sort of paths that they took. And other than that, one more path that people took were also going into applying for UPSC exams. And so the point I'm trying to make is that my journey was my own, but there were other people who were doing so many different things that the diversity of people was extremely, extremely great at CBS. That you honestly, like, if you meet someone on their first day, on your first day, and then you talk to them after 3 years, you'll be like, oh, that's what he's doing. This is the sort of thing that he's doing. And you suddenly meet them after 3 years and you realize, oh my God, he's done these many certifications, he's done these many internships, and he's running his own business now, and God knows what. And you wouldn't even realize how successful they are, or whatever things that they've achieved already according to their parameters already in the past 3 years that you didn't even know about. And that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about in terms of being ambitious and driven. That everybody had their own thing, that they doing really well at it, and they were excelling at it and are currently excelling as well. And so, having said this, I mean, if you go on LinkedIn and just search, I mean, if I search at least CBS, I am able to find alumni across the world and across different premier institutes, at Wharton, at Columbia, at LSE, LBS. All these kids have ended up at great places and doing one of the top degrees, at all these premier institutes. And after all these experiences, this takes me back to one thing that my professor had once said, that the intrinsic value of a student at CBS might be lesser than its market value. Which is to say that since I was someone who had never heard of CBS in my school times, if you go ahead and search on Google, top few institutes in India, business institutes in India, you might not hear of CBS because all of these DO colleges typically take up space. But the kind of people that are here and kind of grooming that is here, that is the kind of atmosphere that is here, kind of culture that is here, prepares you and makes you people that can compete amongst the best in the world. And that's what I'm trying to say when I talk about what other people are doing and how well they are doing right now and where they've reached. And so the kind of alumni community I have, I'm able to just search on LinkedIn. And if I want to think of another space, another company, think of another B school, I have someone who's already doing well there. There are people who are heading organizations. There are people who are have their own startups. For instance, I think the Vadam T's head is from CBS. Value Research CEO is from CBS, and there are other people who are from ICICI and other mutual funds, etc., from CBS. You might not even hear of them talking about their background because they're old, they're 20, 30 years old, but you have that alumni community, and that's what I think was extremely great about these people as well. And one more thing I want to talk about was how uh, you know so I'll get to the Deloitte bit, right? I'll talk about what was my experience with consulting and working and how my career paved. So I felt that I feel that as someone who's might be in college and might be listening, I feel that if you're trying to get and think of what should be your career like, what should you be doing, believe me, if you're confused, I was way more confused than you, and I'm probably very confused as well. But it's an iterative process, is what I've learned. I think once you start working, and I had the privilege to work in consulting, so I was exposed to different sort of business problems, from financial modeling to data analytics, etc. I felt that I've been exposed to different things and be able to eliminate quickly what I don't like. And I think it's an iterative process. You have to get your hands dirty and try and explore these different environments. So I did this through societies and through studying. You can potentially do it through internships. You can do it through working for a couple of years. You can do it through different things. And you'll realize what, what your career, or where you want your career to be, and what you want to do next in life, and where you want to be. And so after working here and being here, I've realized that finance is an interest to me that I want to still do, and probably going to specialize in finance when I go to ISB. I know that I want to eventually have my own business, so I have to learn everything possible through different opportunities I get, so that I can do that successfully later on. I know that I, because of my experience with an actors, etc. I know that I'm someone who wants to do something that eventually drives impact and is founded around creating meaningful change. And I am paving the next 3-4 years and working towards that, given these things that I've learned through my experiences as well. And that's what I've felt that consulting helped me to do, by being exposed to different sort of business problems. I was working with the Ministry of Railways at one point. I was working with a cement manufacturer. I was working with uh, uh, I was working with an airport entity. And so I have realized through all these business problems, what are the sort of business problems I really want to solve, and where am I good, right? And so I feel that for anyone who's listening right now and thinking about what is consulting like, I think this is a perfect space for you to explore all these different business problems and do that elimination sort of thing, so that you can understand what is your specialization later on. Uh, some other things that I wanted to talk about was, so I think I've talked mostly about what my journey has been like, and whatever I missed, we can possibly address to the Q&A. But I'll talk about a couple of things related to some myths, and I'll talk about the preparation tips that I wanted to provide that spoken of earlier. So for in terms of the myths, so there are some myths regarding whether doing the sort of a degree like a BMS or a BBA FIA, is it a generalized, isn't it too generalized a course, and is there really a specialization that you get? So one, even in the BMS, even in BMS, you can do your specialization in finance, you can do your specialization in marketing, in global business operations, and so there are different sort of specializations. And if you are interested in, say, going into economics or something of that sort, I know people who have got into DSC by giving the entrances, and you have subject matter here that is of some sort of, has some sort of intersection with those sort of entrances as well. And there are people who've got into financial engineering, who've got into in doing their masters in economics from CBS. And so, I mean, if you're purely thinking of whether doing this degree will inhibit your options in terms of doing any specialization later on in finance, economics, or anything of that sort, it's not the case. And there are specializations that are provided in BMS itself for these sort of things, these sort of specializations. And also BBA, the degree that I did, financial investment analysis, itself a specialized course in finance. And so it will prepare you really well for finance later on. The second thing is that is this how does it compare to these typical degrees for BCom and econ honors? And what is since those are the conventional sort of degrees that people typically want to take up. So I think that they're great degrees, and for whoever feels that that's the subject matter that they want to study and they want to get into that sort of space later on, that's perfectly all right. But if you want to get into consulting, if you want to get into entrepreneurship, if you want to get into uh, spaces where you have to apply different disciplines together, and you have to think along business problems from varied lenses, right? Then a BBA or a BMS is more practical, right? Because when I'm doing my consulting engagements, there are several times when I just need to know the basic aspects of economics, or basic aspects of running a regression, or basic aspects of statistics, basic aspects of accounting, to be able to solve it, right? And to be able to logically then deduce reach to a conclusion where I can say that, okay, this is the sort of data I have, this is the theory I need to apply to be able to derive meaningful insights. And several times, because you've done only a specialization in economics or in only in econ honors, you might not have that multidisciplinary knowledge to be able to think of all the basics across these different disciplines when solving different business problems. And that's a challenge I've seen people face in with people I've talked to who've done these sort of specializations and who are working in consulting, who are working in in entrepreneurship, etc., because they don't have that multidisciplinary point of view. And I'm not saying that it's there for everyone, but I've seen that challenge, and that's where I feel that a BB or a BMS might have some edge over these courses if these are the priorities that you have potentially. So those are a couple of myths that I wanted to bust. In terms of preparation tips, right? And what all did I do before getting into BBFI? And I think this might be something that people who are currently in 12th or who are going to after their boards be giving the entrances this year might find relevant. So the first thing is that this is an aptitude test, and I think the process now is for CBS and other colleges who take the DUJAT is that there is a 50% weightage on your board results and a 50% weightage on your entrance results, right? So the first thing you have to keep in mind is that if you're in 12th currently, do not start preparing. I would recommend that do not start preparing for your entrances, because you have to get 50% is your weightage on your board results, right? So you have to make sure that you do well in that, and so don't divert your focus towards entrances as of now. Try and focus on that, but simultaneously ensure that your math and your English is strong, and that while you're preparing for those two subjects for your boards, make sure that you're doing them really well, right? Because all of that comes into play when you're giving the entrances. All the math problems of differential. So, one clarification: if you want to get into any of these, into CBS or other colleges that accept the DUJAT, for instance, DDUC, Shaheed Rajguru College, I think there's Keshav Mahavidyalaya, three, four colleges, I think. You have to have math and English, and there's no compulsion on having commerce or science or humanities. You have to have math and English, and that's why they have it in the aptitude test as well. Why would I say math? Because you have to have it till 12th grade, right? So hence I feel that uh, specialize in those subjects while you're studying for your boards as well, instead of doing any entrance preps separately, right? That's my first recommendation. Second thing is that if you have some spare time, if you really do have some spare time alongside your boards preparation, then start reading the newspaper and read it regularly, and try and cultivate a perspective on different issues around you across just different things. Don't just read the business newspaper. Read the Hindu, read the Indian Express, etc. as well, right? And develop perspectives around different issues that are there, so that you'll automatically remember those GK facts that come as questions in the aptitude test as well, that I'll talk about, right? So those are things that I would recommend you start doing if you are in 12th grade, but do not do anything else if your boards are still upcoming. Once if once your boards are done with and your 12th grade is done with, then I would recommend, I mean, this is what I did. I personally some sort associated extremely helpful. But if you aren't able to do that, then take up any book or take up any YouTube courses where you are able to understand the basics of what all is there in the DUJAT. So, for instance, just a revision of your 10th grade mathematics, of algebra, of arithmetic, and all of these things is extremely important. So you need some sort of some level of revision of those things. You need some sort of grammar revision for English. You need some sort of revision for how to solve different puzzles for LRD, for LR and logical reasoning questions in the entrance. And so I'm sorry I didn't clarify this earlier, but essentially the entrance has math, English, logical reasoning, and GK, general knowledge. And so that's why I was talking about these three, four disciplines. Once you're done with your boards, you have to get look at some YouTube videos, or you need to associate with some coaching institute so that you can revise and get these fundamentals back again, because you might not have them clear as of now, since it's been a while since you've studied them. So you need to get that clear. And after that, once you have your fundamentals clear for math, for how to solve logical reasoning problems, once you have them clear through these different things that I talked about, you can also pick up different books from Flipkart, Amazon as well. There are several of them. If you want, I can put up some recommendations after this video as well. After you're done with that, ensure that your focus is on giving mocks and solving past year papers, because it's an MCQ based exam. And even though you might have your math etc. clear in 12th grade, doing an MCQ sort of paper is extremely different, right? Because you don't have to sometimes solve the entire problem. You can just look at options and eliminate just by looking at the options what potentially might not even be close to the answer, right? So you have to you have to develop that sort of skill and acumen to be able to do well in multiple choice questions. And that's why I say that solve a lot of papers and give a lot of these entrances when you're give a lot of these mocks while you're preparing for the entrance. So that was one aspect. The second aspect is what are the other sort of entrances that I gave, and which were what are the other institutes I looked at for BBA and for BMS, etc. Right. So I gave the NMIMS entrance. I gave the entrance for Xavier's Bombay. I gave the DUJAD entrance, and I did well in all of them. I was able to get admission in NMIMS. I reached the interview round in Xavier's, but I didn't go because I think I had my CBS entrance or something around that time. And I cleared CBS, of course. And yeah, I think these were the three, four colleges I applied to. Oh yeah, there was one more program you should look at, which is the Integrated Program for Management in IM Indore, which IM Indore offers, which is a 5-year course. And essentially, instead of going to some place like CBS and doing your degree for 3 years and then applying to an IM, you give your entrance right after graduation and get a 5-year course. You get a degree from Indira Gandhi National University, I think, for the first 3 years, and then you get your MBA degree from IIM Indore itself that after the first 3 years. And so you get a direct admit into IIM Indore's MBA program right after school. And so it's a great course. It's an extremely challenging paper, and you have to have very strong math and logical reasoning skills for it. And I think the same prep that I talked about for DUJAT is applicable there. It's just that you might have to, practice a little more, and you might have to, for the same basic concepts, know slightly more complicated problems, right? So, you'll also have to develop more speed, so improve your calculations, etc. Right? So those are the sort of entrances I gave. I cleared IPM as well. I reached the waitlist round. I was waitlisted in the final stages for IPM, and eventually finally all of these admits got together can come together around at that time. It came come in June July, sorry. And you have some window to choose between going to either of these or going to, if you get an admit into CBS. And so I was able to use that time to finally choose CBS. So that's one thing, that these are the sort of entrances that you can look at. One more thing I would recommend, which I did, was I also gave, because I had public speaking experience, I had Model UN experience, etc. I also gave my ECA trials. So for those who don't know, if you want to get into Delhi University, the board results are of course there, but there are also options for giving ECA trials, which are extracurricular activity trials, and they take in limited number of people. I'm not sure how it's happening now, given the COVID pandemic, etc. It used to be there then, and you can check out how it is. I'm not aware of the policy right now, how things have changed now. But I gave those, and essentially I gave them for debating, and there were a couple of rounds. You had to give an impromptu, speech for a minute or so, when you given like a couple of minutes to prepare on any random topic. And judges from Delhi University would come and judge you, and then there would be standardized scores across hundreds of individuals who would apply. And so it's a great opportunity. I've seen extremely talented people who might not have good board results get into DU and then get into really good colleges in DU through it. ECA is not applicable to CBS. There aren't admits to CBS through ECA, but admits are there to other colleges like LSR, KMC, Hansraj, and other very great, good colleges in Delhi University. And I know of people who, from my school itself, who gave, ECA trials for stuff like filmmaking, right? So it can be any sort of area discipline. We gave it for filmmaking, got into great colleges like Ramjas and LSR, right? And so this is also a great opportunity. So if you've done something in school and done well at it, make sure that you don't let it go to waste, and apply for the ECA trials, because it might just lead you to a road that you might not have thought of earlier. For those who might think of these other institutes like NMIMS, etc., I've seen several people who've gone to NMIMS, and Bombay is the financial capital of the country. Great companies, work for a couple of years, do their MBA. I've seen several people who've done well from NMIS. I've seen several people who've done well from IPM, from the IIM Indore course. And so, CBS is not the be all and end all. These are great institutes as well that you should consider, because the exits, the sort of opportunities there, and the space that you're in is extremely competitive and challenging as well. So definitely consider them. And the other thing that I would say is that even if you don't get into any of these institutes, or you might not get your DU admit, I've seen other people who've been in other colleges, right? Maybe in some DU colleges that you might not be currently aspiring for, or in colleges outside DU, who've also done incredible things, right? They give their CA admits, they give their CA papers. Some of them have gotten admits alongside ISB with me, right? And they weren't in CBS, they weren't in Delhi University colleges, and they still did exceptionally well, right? They were extremely competitive and had many achievements on their record. And so it's not the end of the world if you don't get into any of these colleges. You will have several other things to do that you can look at, for instance, like the CA, CFA, or whatever the specialization that you want to do, think of, and you can give the CAT and get into any of these IIMs. And so there are multiple options, even if you go into some other college that you're not currently aiming for, right? And so don't keep a slightly more open mind when you're thinking of college admissions at that time, because it can be incredibly overwhelming. But think of all of these different options and see wherever you can get in given your capabilities, and whatever works out is going to be great for you. And you have to have that vision to be able to make the most of the opportunities present in whatever space you get into. So those were the things that I talked about. One last thing I wanted to speak about was also, I've talked about being in a very hyper competitive space in CBS, and doing all these challenging activities, and also always doing something, right? But I also want to say that CBS itself, I think there's no other time you'll get other than college when you can be absolutely thinking of only the present and not the future, right? You can just do nothing in a day and still be extremely happy, because you're spending time with great peers who are alongside you, a community of people that you've been able to develop through different things you've done alongside. And I had the opportunity to do that in CBS. Some of my fondest memories, just our college then eventually shifted to Rohini in my second year, and so I was living near my college campus in my third year onwards, and so would stay together in uh, we would stay together in nearby flats. We would do several fun things. We would come in the morning on Monday, on weekdays, and watch Game of Thrones together, because that's when it would be released, like 5 6 a.m. We would go for different trips. I've had the fortune to travel at so many different places. I've traveled to Dubai through a free paid trip to college. I've traveled to Bombay. I've traveled to Bangalore. I've traveled to Chandigarh, to debating tournaments, to an actors. I've traveled through with friends, just fun. I've traveled to several other places I can't even remember, Lucknow and other places. And I think a lot of traveling, being be able to explore different things, was something that I really am fond of in college, because I was able to think, I was able to immerse myself in things and explore them fully without necessarily thinking of the impact that it should have on my future, because I was living clearly in the present. But those are opportunities you might not get when you have a career right now, or when you're doing your job, because if you've done your MBA, you might have liabilities. If you are doing a job, you might not have the time, right? And so make the most of that experience. Have as much fun as you can, and make memories with people, and ensure that you explore all the sort of different things that might interest you, so that you don't have any regrets when you go on later and start doing a 9 to 5 job, or doing your own business or anything of that sort that requires a lot more time commitment, and there are other obligations and pressures as well. So that was something that I have great memories from CBS about as well. And don't think of us as just nerds. I think CBS people are extremely well balanced. Most of the peers I have are coming from spaces where they work hard but they party hard as well. They are extremely well balanced people, and that's the sort of peer group and the sort of community that I've been fortunate enough to get. And those are sort of people you will see in CBS as well, who know what to do when and do it really well, take up immense amount of responsibility, hustle towards it, and do it really well. But also know when it is time to give your personal life and your mental health enough space so that you don't burn out, and you also are able to enjoy and be happy on a day-to-day basis. And that becomes extremely important once you step into your career as well. And that's why I think those are sort of things that I was looking towards, like looking back on from CBS, and how those things made an impact on how I am as an individual now as well, and how I'm able to keep things afloat on uh, different across different things right now. So that was mostly it from my end. I'm sure I missed a bunch of things. So if there are any questions that Plenty has, anyone has, I'm more than happy to answer. And I'm sorry I exceeded. I've taken up so much time. But yeah, any questions that you guys have?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Bhavya. I think that was a very, very detailed session. And I don't really think you overshot at all because I think you were covering almost everything that is required. So thanks for that. Thanks for that. And I think you also answered most of my questions. I think I have just one question that I would want to ask you. And this is actually something you spoke about. I would just want you to elaborate on this a little more. So, if you're a student who's coming from, let's say, a non-economics or a non-commerce background, or let's say a pure sciences background, or let's even assume that you're a student coming from a commerce background who only has, let's say, a general interest in economics or commerce, then
Yeah.
how exactly do you think such a student could make a decision about a BBA FIA versus a bachelor's in economics or a BCom or a BMS, and whether this is something that they could actually do long term?
Fair, that's a very fair question. So one thing is that uh, one is that what is your interest, and what the second aspect is whether you'll be good at this degree and whether you'll take away something from this degree. So, in terms of your interest, does this degree still provide some space for you in terms of exits and in terms of the sort of learning that is there through the degree and through the people that are here? So, I feel I've seen people who've come from the humanities background, who've come from backgrounds in humanities who didn't have an interest in business at all or in commerce or economics at all, who then, once they had this sort of multidisciplinary knowledge and access to different sort of disciplines here, and also were involved in these different societies, like in Actors, for instance, could explore different dimensions of how they can create any value in a particular space. So what CBS teaches you is uh, how to essentially create value in different spaces, according to me. And Actors is a great example of that. So I know people who, as I talked about, so people who came from humanities who are now who had no interest in business but are doing extremely well in developmental consulting. I know people who didn't study business at all, had a science background, but are doing extremely well and got interested in finance because it's slightly more quantitative, right? And have a more quantitative bent. So one aspect of the question was, if you don't have an interest in business, does this provide some space for you to explore and find the space that you might want? Definitely, it does. And it might just be that because the multidisciplinary nature of it, it for instance, you have somewhat of an interest in economics and somewhat of an interest in, say, quant, but you're not sure if you should take the economics honors degree. And you have, for instance, you have somewhat of an interest in accounts, but you're not that interested. You don't know if you want to take the BCom honors degree. I think this is a better bet than those two, because once you get into those sort of disciplines, it's difficult for you to then find jobs later on that might be related to other fields. I mean, I'm not sure because I haven't directly experienced it, but that's what I've heard and I've seen people, and I've seen the syllabuses, etc. as well. So I feel that it might be a better bet this way. And also, I feel that really want to do a specialization, you still have ample amount of time and space after you've discovered what you really want to do in this particular period of time as well. And secondly, are people able to do well despite not having an interest here? So, I mean, typically our classroom of say 30, 40 kids would have, say 20, 15, 20 kids who might have commerce. Rest would be science and humanities people. So there's fair amount of diversity here. There are people who have come from different backgrounds, have come from different streams. And as I said, I mean, they've made it in the best sort of institutes and jobs across the country and across the world. And so I feel that they're able to do well in a classroom because it's not that, so say, other than say some subjects like accounting or some subjects like maybe economics, most of the subjects are taught from scratch, right? Every subject is taught from scratch, but there might be relatively more time that I've devoted towards accounting because I have a commerce background than say someone who was coming from science, right? So they might have slightly more might find it slightly more challenging to do well in it or to understand it in a short period of time, right? But eventually, everything is taught from scratch, all of these subjects, and it becomes a level playing field completely. And many of the people who are toppers in my degree in my college are mostly from are from science, humanities, etc. It doesn't really matter. I know personally of people. So if you are someone from that background who is thinking of, oh, I have some level of interest in business, uh, should I do it? It might be a better bet than eco honors or bcom honors if you're not as clear about those specializations. And whether choosing between BFI or BMS in that regard, I personally would recommend a BMS if you're not sure of pursuing a specialization in BFI in finance later on, because it's slightly even more multidisciplinary and slightly less quantitative than BFI as well. So I would recommend that. And after you think of, okay, these might be good fits, you definitely should know that if you're good enough to clear the entrances here and get admission here, you're definitely good enough to be way better than people who might have low, even more higher amount of interest and maybe a commerce background or something of that sort than you did when you were in 12th. So don't have any apprehensions about that. I hope that answers my question, your question.
Yep, it definitely does. Thanks a lot for that, Bhavya. And I think that brings me to the end of the questions and with that, the session. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of Team Plant for that really lovely and detailed session, Bhavya, because I think that you've covered everything about the whole course and also about the different options that are out there that a student could actually look for. And I think that was really useful. So thanks for that. And yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time out for this.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure for me to be here. I'm more than happy to contribute in any way. And I hope the listeners took away some level of insight from the session. If anyone wants to reach out to me or talk about anything in particular or have any queries further about entrances or about careers, uh, reach out to me on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you possibly find me. I'm more than happy to help out.
Thanks again.